So we've heard from companies that are adapting in a shifting world, and businesses don't operate in vacuums. There's cities, there's geopolitical situations, there's institutions to work with. Businesses are shaped by climate, politics, migration, food, water, and our next guest has spent her whole career connecting all of these dots. From grassroots communities to global institutions, she's had a potted career as the former president of WWF France, a former executive of the UN Convention to Combat Diversification, the special envoy of the French president on the global environment, the UN EPD director, and now she's part of the special convoy for the French president of the global environment. Please welcome on stage Monique Bardot. Hello, Monique, how are you doing?
I am fine. Hello to everybody.
So from an international, you've got loads of international experience, and you do see some of the biggest intersections between climate, migration, and inequality. What do you think really needs to shift nowadays for us to be able to build a more fairer, but also a more resilient, but also a fairer global economy?
I think that first we need to stop taking the subject in silos. You have here passionate people about climate change. Mm-hmm. In other fora, you will meet people who are passionate about biodiversity. And in other fora, you will meet passionate people about development. And if we do not want to look at all those questions going together, then we are always missing. Let me give you an example. 10 years ago, there was a mechanism being created in the climate convention called the REDD mechanism. It was the protection of forests for climate change. 2 years after, they were obliged to add a plus, so REDD plus, because they forgot that there was biodiversity in the forest. And then, 2 years after, there was a second plus added because they forgot that there were people also living in forest. And that altogether, it makes another story. If you take, for example, the question of food security, land, climate, you get to another story. For example, we noted that in Africa, in 2012, there has been a big food riot because prices went very much up. They went up because land could not produce anything. So we did a statistic at the time of a certain number of things. And what did we see? Is that the same place where you had desertification, you had those food riots, and those were also the place where Al-Qaeda was present. And the three maps were just matching each other. And so here you see the links between all those subjects that you need to take all together. At the same time, if you keep on into the positive aspect of the story, is that restoring an hectare of degraded land in Africa is very cheap. It's about between $500 and $1,000 the hectare. Just to give you a comparison, a migrant, an illegal migrant in a camp in France, in Italy or elsewhere, costs 45 euros per day.
Per day?
Per day, and usually those illegal migrants stay in those camps around 18 months, makes the calculation of what it means in terms of money which could be available to do, for example, new system of agriculture in those countries. And so, the reality we see is not a fatality. It's also the way that we want to design and how we look at the different things and the different budget in all our government.
And there's so much in what you just said to unpack, so much. So the first thing I really heard in what you were saying is we can't be looking in these silos. We're looking in silos, we fix one problem, and then we realize, oh, who'd have thought that forestry and biodiversity would be linked? Oh, wait a minute, there's people that live in these places. So we can't just bubble it into a single bubble. We actually need to be thinking a lot broader as we move forward. And this notion that, the other thing that I really picked up on is this notion that maybe there's not enough money, but when we look at the allocation of funds, there are ways we're spending money right now where if we redirected it, we'd probably have more than enough money to be able to move forward some of these big climate what's the word I'm looking for? Initiatives that would move things forward. You've been doing this work for a while, so you've got lots of examples of transformation at scale. For example, some of the work that you did in Niger and in Inner Mongolia. Can you maybe share some examples that you can show us what's possible, the art of the possible when businesses, communities, and policy come together and we can get it right?
Yeah. Again, to have this discussion, you have to understand that in many parts of the world, the question of climate change is not the question of energy choice. It does not really matter what kind of energy you have. The question is the question of how you can make a living. And for example, in Niger, the government of Niger a few years ago developed a policy called Nigerian Feeds Niger. In French, it's nicer because it's free N. Les Nigérians nourrissent le Niger. On that initiative, they restore in the zone of Zender 1 million hectares of land, which they planted. Today, Niger is a net exporter of food from that region. So you can take the worst part of the world and again make something out of it. If before talking of Inner Mongolia in China also, there has been a program which has on a part of China called the Plateau de l'Eus, where they decided to go for a 4 million hectares of agroecology and actually agroforestry. That program, which has been financed largely by the World Bank, has proven to have taken 6 million people out of poverty.
Say that number again.
6 million.
Billion or
million.
Oh, 6 million people out of poverty from a single project.
Yeah, on that region. And we have seen also, this is right now looked at by scientists, that region, which was really a dry region of China, where actually now rains are coming back because of the way the trees have been planted into all that ecosystem, which is again a 4 million hectares on one tenant. And so, different level. Of course, the project of China has not the same a financial cause than the one of Niger, but it works. Now, also, let me give you two other examples. One of a private bank. A few years ago, Mirova, which is a subsidiary of Natixis, launched what we call the Land Degradation Neutrality Fund. And it was, at the time, the largest impact fund not dedicated to energy. That fund is now $350 million. All of it has been spent. They're going on phase 2, which is another 350 million into this kind of subject. And so, clearly, in all those programs, which are not pure mitigation for climate change, but nature-based solution, you have all kinds of incentive also to create economic development linked to what you are doing. And you need to do that because at the same time, you are touching upon, for me, the crisis which is even more important than the one of climate change, which is the one of biodiversity. Because on climate change, we can adapt a little bit. In biodiversity, the day you lose it, it's game over.
You can't bring it back. When it's gone, it's gone. And not in a good way. We're not selling something here. You can't restock it. So it's really helpful to hear that these nature-based solutions allow for the cross-collaboration that we're talking about and solves for a multitude of problems. So it solves for climate, it solves for employment, giving people a livelihood, bringing them out of poverty. It also solves for biodiversity. And so linking back to what you sort of said at the beginning around, we've got to start thinking beyond the silos. We can't simply be thinking about solving for one thing. These nature-based solutions are a route forward that allows for different parties to collaborate in such a way that we actually magnify the impact of the result that we get. We've covered a lot as we've been speaking, from geopolitics to various different land partnerships. If you could shift just one mindset in the way that people in this room are thinking, something that you think would just move the needle considerably, what would that be? If there's one thing we could walk out of this room and say, if we flick that switch and start to think about climate like this, we could really make a huge movement.
Well, again, it's true that the starting point of the climate problem has been the way that we in Western countries have been developing. But that's the past. Now we should really be in what is our reality and what are the trends of the future. And for me, the main efforts on mitigation should not be in our Western countries anymore, except for the US, which is very late. But Europe altogether only weighs 6% of all the emission. You have big emergent countries that we need to help to mitigate. This is where mitigation should be. In countries like ours, France, but it goes also very much for all the rest of Europe, we need to take measures on adaptation. More we last of taking those measures, and more the cost of it is going to be important. You need, clearly, this should be where we put all the efforts today in our countries. And then you have all the rest of the countries, which is a large majority of them, which are very vulnerable to climate change. And forgetting them is putting a security risk on the head of everybody. So, forgetting Africa, forgetting small island states is clearly creating a security question which is going to be unsolvable if we don't have them. Just to give you an example on that, I did a few years ago a study with the British Army on climate change in Africa and consequences. And the conclusion of that studies were that if we were not doing anything now, by 2045, there will be 60 million of Africa in obligation to move.
Wait. So if we don't do anything in 2045, 60 million
of Africans will have no
choice but to migrate somewhere else.
Exactly. From the
That's a lot of people moving.
Yes. And so when you think that today we are in a turmoil because there is 1 million people at our doors, imagine what we are talking about. And also, imagine that today we have maybe 1 million at our doors. But the most migration in Africa today is inside Africa, creating huge stability problems in different countries. If you look what's happening between South Africa and its neighbors, if you see how many millions of migrants have been stopped in Morocco, for example, and so are there today, and the different movement between countries like Nigeria, Chad, all those countries, creating a huge instability pole. And we should not really imagine that it is not our problem. It's going to be our problem. And so there are 3 different types. Again, to summarize, here in our Western European countries, adapt. In big emerging countries, help them to mitigate. Go for huge technology transfer there. And in the vulnerable countries, make sure we give them
We've got to act. We've got to act now, and we've got to act in a much broader way to be able to have the impact. Monique, this has been a conversation. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Please give her a really warm round of applause.
Thank you. Bye-bye.